Welcome to the Women in Vinyl podcast with Jenn Eugenio, founder of Women in Vinyl, and contributor Robyn Raymond. This podcast facilitates conversations with those working in the vinyl record industry to educate, demystify, and diversify the vinyl community.
This is what we get. Our course already set. Doing the same dance. Pull through, spread ignorance. Yeah. Consume. Yeah. We're doomed.
Thank you for joining the Women in Vinyl podcast. On this week's Tech Talk, we're keeping it all in the family and have invited our amazing, talented Jett Galindo of The Bakery and also Women in Vinyl board member to join us. This conversation was just so good that we had to make it a two-parter. Thanks for joining us today, Jett.
Thanks for having me.
Hi, Jett.
Always a fun time spending tech talk with Jenn and Robyn here. So I'm excited to be here on the Women in Vinyl podcast.
Black Shirt Club.
I know.
I mean, I'm just excited to kick it with you because I always just get to watch you on all of these amazing things that you're on, sharing your knowledge freely. And like, you're always multitasking.
Dude, this is our
updating a
third
sheet,
webinar.
writing this thing. And I'm just like, how many screens does she have while she's answering all of the questions in a very thoughtful and like prepared manner? I mean, you do the mastering profession such a credit. And like, this isn't just because we're homies. Like, this is me totally being a fangirl too. But
You're being such a homie.
Oh, dude, I got you.
We love you.
But yeah, I mean, like, you do the mastering field such a credit by being so accessible all of the time to all of these people and like sharing your knowledge with Izotope, with Pro Tools, with anybody, and with Women in Vinyl, with Sound Girls, with Make It Equal, with everybody that is, you know, asking for your time. I mean, you have an incredibly busy schedule as well. It's always so good to get 5 minutes of your time, let alone an hour. Selfishly.
How did you get into it, Jett? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, since this is tech talk, we'll make it really quick. And I'm sure it's always a cool story when we talk about how any Women in Vinyl works in the vinyl industry, because it's not something you really get to go to school for, you know? Maybe it'll change. But for me,
that's the goal, Jett. You know, right? That too.
Yeah, that's the goal of Women in Vinyl is global and academic domination. Yeah. But yeah, just a quick story to how I ended up here is just me all the way in the Philippines, just growing up in a musical family, and my parents named me Joan Jett for a reason. They teach and manage cover bands in the Philippines. And because they're musicians,
it's so
they're
good.
cool.
I love it.
It's amazing.
I've always been exposed to music, and I didn't ever see myself doing anything besides music. And I'm sure that applies to like many of our colleagues in vinyl. But for me, audio engineering was just such a perfect marriage of two things that I love, music and technology. And as a musician, what I really excelled in is the technical aspect. I was just telling Robyn and Jenn earlier that I have no producer bone in my body. It's really the technical side that I really get to express myself fully. Since there's no audio engineering program in the Philippines, I was able to just use the time and prepare so I can go to Berklee College of Music to study sound. And from there, I worked as a recording engineer in Avatar Studios after Berklee. But from there, word got around that the Mastering Lab, which is the very first independent mastering facility all over, which opened in 1967, 1969, I can't remember. They were looking for a new right-hand person for Doug Sachs, who is considered the grandfather of mastering. And at that point, since I've always just enjoyed mastering, I packed my bags, left New York, and moved on to the middle of nowhere, Ojai, California, to work with Doug. It just so happened that Doug is also known for just being an amazing vinyl mastering engineer and cutter. And I was grateful to learn the ropes through him. And he passed away in 2015, but me and my colleagues from the mastering lab went on to open the bakery. So now our studio is in the Sony Pictures lot. And yeah, we still cut vinyl to this day. And somehow through the magic of the internet, I got connected with Women in Vinyl, thanks to Jenn. And I just thought the movement is so cool, showcasing all these profiles of these badass women. That's not just in like audio engineering, but also like in all the facets of just the vinyl business. People who run record stores, manage record labels, do lathe cutting. It's just freaking amazing. So I'm glad to be doing this with you guys.
We officially have a job board now too, which is pretty
I
exciting.
know, I saw.
Yeah, that's so rad.
Yeah.
I was like,
Gosh, finally.
I was up all night troubleshooting it. I'm like, come on.
That's
who's
seriously
gonna
the
take the bite?
first.
Yeah.
That's the first of its kind.
Yeah.
And let me know when that is out so we can spread the word.
I mean, it's live. Like
It's out.
Yeah.
Oh
yeah,
shoot!
yeah.
Sweet.
We've got like 3 posts on it right now. Yeah.
Damn. Okay,
Yeah.
that's so exciting. So I'll definitely spread the word. It's like I'm sure, hey, audio students, sound girls, and Gear Space is gonna the job
I mean,
board.
I feel like Pornhub should totally buy the old one because there's gotta be a crossover there. There's gotta be. For those of you that know what we're talking about, for those of you that don't, just drop me a message and I'll tell you all about it. Let's get into it, man. Let's talk about vinyl mastering specific, and then maybe we can talk about like digital mastering a little bit, like towards the end. But let's talk about cutting, buddy. You and I both cut. Yours are a little bit more permanent and particular than mine are, let's say.
I do want to visit your space someday, Robyn, if I get to visit.
I mean, and vice versa, dude. Yeah. The nice part about my rig is that I could probably box it up and bring it with me.
Put it on the plane.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, just a big old
I
road
recommend
case.
the Sony lot at Halloween. That was fun.
Oh yeah.
I got a
that
drink
was
with like
perfect.
a blueberry eyeball in it. It was
No.
very on brand for me.
That's so true.
Is it one of the
yeah.
things where people like chase you with the chainsaws that don't have the chain on it? Because
There were zombies, yeah.
I'm not into that.
There was. It's insane. It's the timing was perfect. But yeah, when Jenn, when we hung out together in our studio in the Sony Pictures lot, it was around happy hour time, and again before pandemic, every Thursdays there's always happy hour on the Sony lot.
As long as there's chicken wings, I'm there.
Yeah, there is, man. And then the happy hour is also Halloween themed, Jenn themed. And yeah, it's so cool. And maybe when Robyn comes, it's going to be a different theme.
I mean, it'll be the happiest hour, regardless if I'm there, obviously. Just put me in a Mickey hat and I'm good. So yeah, let's talk about cutting, bro. So how do we get the music onto the surface that we're cutting? Do you have a nice answer for that? Because I never do. It's always kind of a...
It's always complicated, but
yeah.
Just to like quickly do a quick rundown of the whole vinyl process. Yeah, the very standard procedure anytime music gets released into vinyl is there are 3 major parts, and I'm sure Jenn and Robyn agrees, and we can add like little stages here and there, but it's mainly starting with cutting the vinyl master. It's usually the lacquer master, also known as acetate, but it's made of an aluminum disc coated with nitrocellulose lacquer. And you were going to say something, Robyn?
I was just going to say like our favorite sandwich cookie.
Yes. And
they'll take ships when you're out there.
A fresh box of lacquer discs is just so nice to open, and it smells really nice too. It smells like, well, it is technically nail polish.
I was going to say gunpowder and nail polish. Yeah. You got some weird smells. I bet the candles in your house smell really weird, Jen.
And from there, how your music gets cut onto vinyl is it starts with that first stage, which is it doesn't start out as a vinyl disc first. Of course, it's different when you're doing lathe cuts because it is direct to the actual material, right?
Yeah.
But with the actual process of mass manufacturing LPs, it starts with the acetate or lacquer disc. And you have a heated stylus. And that heated stylus is attached to like a diaphragm that translates. There's like an actual transduction from the acoustic to the actual electronic energy where the vibrations make it into the hot stylus, and that heated stylus cuts the music on the actual nitrocellulose lacquer on the acetate disc. And there's actually a vacuum that sucks those chip that is cut away from the disc. Do you guys have a vacuum attached to your lathe cut?
So far, our processes are identical. Like my my stylus is heated as well, and it like the cutter head, they're kind of almost the same. You have like a dynamic feedback cutter head, and I have just a dynamic cutter head at this point. I can upgrade mine, which is in the future.
And you can.
And what does that mean for someone that doesn't know what that is?
Like the feedback one, and Jett, you might be able to speak a little bit more to what the feedback cutter head is, because that's
Are you talking about the program versus preview?
No, that's like what the actual, like, you get feedback on like from your cutter head and from the lacquer. Like there's an actual like frequency feedback that the head actually like reads and changes. So you're able to cut different and like higher and lower frequencies because of your feedback cutter head than I'm able to, because mine's only a dynamic cutter head. Does that kind of make sense, Jenn?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I feel like that's like sometimes why with lathe cuts in general, there's a discrepancy in lo-fi and hi-fi and whatever, but there's also like limitations on what a lathe cut head is able to do compared to like a lacquer cutting head or a DMM head for sure. But yeah, I have a vacuum too, and it pulls off my chip too. So
yeah, and it's very important that you want to keep your cutting surface clean as you cut the music from beginning to end. Yeah. A lot of things come into place before the music gets cut into the actual disc. You have to take into account certain sonic characteristics in the music that you have to account for before you cut into vinyl, because the vinyl format has a lot of quirks. And if you're going to be the vinyl cutter, you need to account for those quirks to make sure that your music plays nicely on the vinyl format. So stuff like sibilance, stereo imaging on your low end, and even the programming of your music from beginning all the way to the end is also going to determine the how your music's going to play back on vinyl. But we're going to go into detail later on that. So once we've cut the actual music on the lacquer disc, when you cut the master, you don't play it back, because you want to make sure that once you've cut the lacquer master, it's completely pristine and it's shipped overnight to the second stage of the vinyl production process, which is the electroplating.
And maybe you could talk real quick, Jett. Like, so for those that don't know, we'll get into Apollo and all that later, but where do lacquers come from and how long do they last once they've been cut?
That's a good question. So these lacquer acetates come from very specialized companies that do this completely. And there was this huge news.
Company. One company.
At this point, there's only one
MDC
reliable industry standard for the source of your lacquers, and they're based in Japan. So they're called MDCs, but before that there were actually two distributors of acetates, and the major one is based here in the US, and they're called Apollo. But if you Google Apollo lacquer on the internet, you will immediately find that there was a big fire.
February 8th, 2020.
Yes, it's
Kablowie.
like part of the whole 2020 apocalypse was the entire vinyl industry getting shook by this incident. Accident. Who knows? But so yeah, the whole Apollo building just caught fire, and basically over half of the source of acetate materials are gone. So
And cutting stylists too.
yeah, cutting stylists. They're
Transco.
also
Transco
distributors
too, yeah.
of cutting stylists, and now I'm not sure how the other cutting facilities are faring, and I believe like Capital used Apollo solely, so they were not the first in line for access to MDCs. So MDCs had to ration and make sure that they provide enough supply for cutting facilities. And so far, for the bakery, we're able to make sure we ordered a lot just on time. And strangely enough, we were able to order several boxes of 7-inch acetate refs before Apollo burnt down. It's
Wow.
it's
Well, that's
insane. So
Yeah. And we mentioned on
Yeah.
the last episode how, everyone here, we all prefer lacquer. But we mentioned on the last episode how, we don't have direct metal mastering. So this really impacted the U.S. vinyl manufacturing significantly.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
Canada too.
Yeah, it's not exactly, because this isn't a formula that anybody can just replicate and start making lacquers.
Exactly, and in fact, there are if you're gonna look it up in the news, there's actually some companies that are hoping to jump in and also offer these lacquer discs. And I can't remember the actual names, but one is based in France. And in fact, since we were talking about cutting stylists and Apollo, the main distributor of cutting styli, burnt down, there's actually a French company called MyShank.
That's where I get my colored blanks from.
Yeah, they're awesome. So
Yeah.
MyShank is
Steve.
now they all
Shout
yeah.
out to Steve.
we actually use MyShank stylus for cutting, and
Really?
they're incredibly reliable. Yeah.
Yeah.
So our cutting stylus is now MyShank. So for cutting stylus, we use MyShank, and for the acetates, it's completely MDCs. And even in the first place, we've always liked MDCs over
Yeah.
Apollo. So it hasn't really affected our
Workflow.
but a lot of it was just panicking, and we even had to like research on how to get direct access to MDCs for a time. And from there, it even got to the point where we found a Japanese translator so that we can communicate with Sony Japan. It's fun. But so far we haven't had any problem. And yeah, it's starting to get busier again, just because, knock on wood, we're at the tail end of the pandemic, but a lot of logistics and shipping got really affected. It affected the entire vinyl industry last year, and we still feel the effects to this day. There's a lot of moving elements to vinyl. So once your actual lacquer master is cut, when it goes into the second stage, which is plating, that's where your master gets turned into a metal stamper. And from the metal stamper, it gets sent into pressing, where your stampers for side A and B gets attached into a press, and tons of heated pressure just presses your vinyl chip and flattens it, and it hugs all the nooks and crannies of your metal stamper, and that's how you come up with an LP. So that's how your music gets transferred into a vinyl record.
I mean, I think that's the craziest part about lathe cutting, is that you get to cut an A and a B. I have to cut an A and a B on the same record. So if my A is great,
Yeah,
that's
if your
super.
A is
If my
blown,
B side
B is
gets
blown.
blown, then I gotta
Exactly.
cut an A and a B. So
Yeah, and with lathe cut, you cut real time too.
Oh, really?
Do you cut in faster or half speed?
No.
Just real time. So
Yeah,
like
just real
you
time.
you can't rush a lathe cutter,
No, you can't.
lady.
I mean, please. I hope everybody underline bolds and highlights that in their brain pans. Please don't rush
But yeah,
lathe cutters.
just
We're nice humans.
whichever vinyl direction you go for, vinyl in general is time consuming. So I remembered on our panel with Sound Girls, Karen from Gold Rush Printing was saying, if you're ever going to be releasing your music on vinyl, only announce that your release date when you've approved the test pressing.
I
'Cause
can't
there's-
stress that enough.
Right.
Like,
I think
underline,
that's so
bold
much.
that, please.
Yeah, underline and bold that from a pressing plant perspective. I mean, I feel like that's the one thing that has always been echoed on every single thing that we've ever done with any of these conversations on any platform. It's wait until you get it in your hands, because there's 1 million things that can go wrong. So
Well, and I
that's
think
just
we should
vinyl.
talk about some of the things that can go wrong. But first, I wanted to ask you both, from a cutting perspective, if there are certain types of music that you find easier to cut than others.
oh yeah.
You kind of don't want to jinx it though, because there are times when the supposedly easy record suddenly has some weird anomalies on that record, and sometimes the music that is supposed to be scary and difficult actually cuts without a problem.
Anything that is like in mono makes my life easy. So I mean, that's the one thing. Anything that is a little bit more down the middle is fantastic. I mean, I find anything that is mostly acoustic instruments, like not in the digital realm, anything that's like bass, drums, and like a real bass guitar or a stand-up bass, something that
Agree.
Exists in nature.
Because I mean, vinyl is an old format that existed in the days where music is just all these instruments. It's like
Exactly.
that instrument like lends itself well to the vinyl format as opposed to like freaking EDM and hip-hop.
that's exactly it. I mean, I want to make a t-shirt, and maybe this is my spin-off t-shirt, the Robyn Raymond line that's all rants from the Women in Vinyl podcast.
I'd buy
Computers make music for computers. You can't always make a computer file or something that's made in Ableton and Native Instruments and all of those MIDI worlds into a vinyl-friendly format.
Yeah,
So,
it's interesting because, like, from a pressing perspective, a lot of times when something is really quiet, for example, it's harder because you really want
Yes,
to get
that
rid
too.
of like all of that surface noise that people used to appreciate for vinyl, they no longer want. So it's harder to press that type of thing. So that's why I was curious from your guys' perspective.
And also the whole fact that we have this new generation of vinyl listeners, and even people who are like enjoying vinyl for the first time, they have to realize the fact of the matter is vinyl noise is part of appreciating the format. You can't enjoy vinyl with the idea that you're going to have like a pristine, quiet listening experience. Like it's inherent to the format. And like what Jen was saying, sometimes what you might think is like an easy record to cut, for example, it's a highly dynamic record, which makes it sounds great, but then on the very quiet sections, you also have to take into account the surface noise on your LP. So you have to make sure that the vinyl itself, the material, and like the temperature that it's pressed, all of those things are suddenly more exposed. So
I mean, even the stylus heat and the humidity in your room is going to affect
even the sound
how
of
quiet you can
the
get.
vacuum.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so a lot of things start to become more exposed and naked on like very quiet records, dynamic records.
It's true.
And on the other end of the spectrum, like just expect if you're an electronic producer that electronic music is not gonna translate like 100% accurately when cutting into vinyl format, especially if it's like Skrillex or like hard hitting, incredibly compressed sound, and that is part of the music for many of these genres. But just expect
bass in
that
180 degree stereo.
Yeah.
Oh man, I'm just like,
Yeah.
why though? Like,
Yeah.
I get it to a point because like, but I don't understand why anybody wants that on vinyl anyway. Like, and that's just me being really, really real.
Here's the
that's
thing.
different. It's a different listening thing than like being at a party, being at a rave, being between the speaker bins, and you're like rocking out. That's a whole different world than you putting on a nice piece of vinyl and doing it in your living room. I'm sorry, but full judgment. I don't care about the pandemic. Like literally, you guys, Why are you making me make this music on vinyl? It makes me half bald. Look at my photos. Seriously.
Actually, but just to add to that too, there and I'm sure Jen would agree with this. Like there are certain genres that are more experimental and very forward thinking that somehow is able to thrive and succeed in the vinyl realm. And I'm talking about video game music. Jen does and Furnace does a lot of video game vinyl.
Oh yeah, I just did 50 LPs of 8-bit video games. So I mean, I'm in it, girl. Trust me.
There's like a really large fan base of just people who love to listen to video game music on vinyl. And you know what? It kind of makes sense because a lot of these people who appreciate the music on video games, it's mostly it's very immersive in a way that they hear the music when they're playing video games.
Yeah, it's background. It's not not a choice. It's just like ambient. And like I get that, but that's like
video
different
game
than a
music
Skrillex experience.
Yeah.
It made me think of that made me think of like the Wizard of Oz and Pink Floyd. Like people should put on their video game record and then like start the video game
at the same time.
and then do them at the same time.
That's so cool.
But like, what do you do when you get to the Mario Castle level and you're still on the water soundtrack part? You know what I mean? Like then you're like discombobulated and you're like, do I shoot fireballs or do I try and swim right now? I don't know what to do.
But there are certain like when I say like anytime I don't want to jinx a vinyl project because sometimes the easiest can be the hardest. On the other end of the coin, there's also those that are seemingly scary and difficult, but then just go off without a hitch when you cut onto vinyl. I've been doing a lot of electronic music into vinyl recently, and the more that you do it, you just get used to the whole processing that works best for that genre specifically. But yeah, vinyl is interesting that way because no matter how experimental the music scene gets, it's like vinyl is here to stay. And in a way, it's like setting people's expectations that this is how music is going to sound on vinyl. And at the end of the day, it's like that's the reason why you appreciate the format in the first place. It's different, but it's a character.
Well, and to ask kind of a technical question from my side to your side, Jett, like when you get something that has like sub bass in 180 degree pan, are you having that conversation with the artist? Because I know I'll modify it and then listen to it and then A/B it. And those listening at home, A/B means you're going to check your digital source and then check your like modifications and like what your cut's going to sound like so that you can compare them and see if it's like close, no cigar. Maybe we could pass this. Like at what point do you have that conversation? Because I'm like, yo, this does, in my opinion, I've had to change this so much that it doesn't sound anything like what I think you're trying to achieve. So this is what it might sound like if you want to go ahead with this. But
I have had that conversation, especially for it's mostly electronic producers too.
Totally.
If you guys look up this amazing artist, his name is Hark Madley, and his music's been featured in the most recent Apple iPhone ad, which is really cool. But it's essentially like experimental electronic hard-hitting music, and I already knew that this is gonna take me an entire day of doing test cuts and processing. I had to like let the artist know that this is what you're going to be expecting when your music's going to be on vinyl. It's not going to be the same as like listening to your music on digital platforms at all.
And I think to jump in there real quick too, I find that a lot. This happens a lot when people are approving their test pressings.
Yeah.
They'll say things to us like the levels here are not correct, or we're hearing something, that's wrong and it'll be audio things, and like that's not something that we can do anything about when we're pressing. Like
totally.
we're just making a copy.
The reality.
It's
the reality of the format, and it's up to us to set expectations. And luckily for me, since I'm not in a position where I have to worry about making X number of vinyl cuts on one day. It's very much, this is the project that I'm going to work on. I can schedule as much time as I need to make sure it sounds great. And plus we cut at half speed. So it also makes cutting electronic music much easier on our end. But yeah, it's like at that point, I can spend the whole day just doing, just adjusting and doing test cuts. I'm very much fortunate to be in that position, but it's also not fun to be just being obsessive unnecessarily. So it's that and setting expectations.
Did you find that you got more comfortable or more bold having those conversations as you like matured in the role, or like were you like, I can do everything, like right from the get-go? Because I mean, no, right, like, when I started, I was like, everything's no problem, it's fine, I'll figure it out. Meanwhile, I'm like, oh my god, what am I doing? And
no, seriously, but I think the more you mature into this role, the more you're like eager to just set the facts and establish expectations. And it helps when the client attends the session. Right. And especially when they're there, I love doing test cuts for them. And since we have like this abundant number of 7-inch discs from Apollo, like huge stack, I like cutting 7-inch discs, like a one-off on an acetate disc, so they can hear how it sounds. And many times they realize that, oh, okay, this is what happens when you don't adjust your settings. I had to like explain to my client that if we don't do these necessary adjustments to the low end and to the high frequency sibilants on your production, this is how your music's gonna sound. And it could cause some groove lifts and skips and distortions. Sometimes them seeing it for themselves, they realize that, okay, I totally understand the limitations of vinyl. And
what do those terms mean for someone that's listening?
I think that's one of the questions. It's like, what are the things that you have to expect when you're putting your music onto the vinyl format? Like number one, and I'm sure you guys have covered this before, is sibilants.
No, this is the first time we're getting into any actual audio talk, buddy. Oh yeah, exactly.
No, but
I told you.
That's why you're here.
I was like, oh, good. Now we got credibility. Hooray!
Shut up. So sibilants is going to be the first thing that is going to be like a reality check for many artists and clients putting their music on vinyl. Let's go back to the example of like easy records to cut. You'd think that like a folk record or like an acoustic singer-songwriter album or a jazz album is going to cut great on vinyl without problems. Just watch out for the sibilants on the lead vocal, man. Like we had to cut like a Diana Krall record, and just her sound in general with Al Schmidt's mix, there's a lot of like very upfront, intimate, high frequency that's it just like jumps out of the mix. And that's gonna be problematic when you're cutting onto vinyl. Like the actual physical stylus, when you're using your turntable, can't physically keep up with the rapid modulation of the sibilant energy when it's cut into the vinyl groove. So the higher the frequency, the shorter the grooves. So the grooves are just more rapid and shorter. When the playback stylus on your turntable traces the grooves, it can't physically keep up with the sibilants. So what ends up happening is it sounds like distortion. It's essentially going to be distortion on your turntable. Your vinyl cutter most of the time relies on de-essing in order to tame that sibilance. If you know that your music's going to go into the vinyl format, it's good to have some sensitivity and awareness to just tame those sibilants, because at the end of the day, it's better to control the sibilants on the mix stage as opposed to the
getting
vinyl
a poor
cutting
mastering
stage.
engineer to do it.
Yeah. And vinyl cutters have really purpose-built tools that do a great job with targeting the sibilants without affecting the rest of the master. And there's a lot of like digital plugins that also do a great job. I personally prefer using Izotope RX to just do a spectral repair and isolate that S rather than using a standard de-esser. That's my personal preference. Sometimes I'd go through the entire album just isolating those S one at a time rather than like using a de-esser. That for me is like the most transparent, man.
Here,
it's
and
better
here,
than
and
like
here,
an outboard.
and there,
Yeah,
and here, and here.
Yeah, it's like at this point, vinyl cutters already know when a sibilance is not gonna.
It's going to be problematic.
Yeah, it's gonna be problematic. So if you're gonna be the mixer or the artist and you're sending your music into vinyl cutting, be aware, but also don't let that like affect your creativity and your production process. Because there's a lot of people who think that, oh, I've read this about vinyl, I'm just gonna take care of it and call it a day.
So this is an extra little treat for you guys this week because there's so much more to come. This conversation bridged for a long time because obviously Jett and I can't shut up about mastering and cutting records. So sorry about that, Jenn.
All the knowledge. Dropping all the knowledge.
Yeah, getting right down into it. Right down into the dusty grooves. So everybody gets a bonus. There's going to be a mastering / cutting records part 2 because we like to give you more than you anticipated all of the time. Stay tuned. We're going to have an extra special guest in between these 2 episodes, and then we'll jump back into mastering and cutting, and you'll know all the things. Thanks, everybody.
Sponsored by.
Yeah. So thanks as always to the Arc of All for our intro and outro music. The Women in Vinyl store is live on the website at womeninvinyl.com/store. As always, please join in the conversation on Instagram or send us a note at media@womeninvinyl.com. Check us on our information if you have anything to share, if there's anything that we missed out on. Check out womeninvinyl.com for past episodes and the amazing archive of interviews. Thanks so much, as always, to Black Circle Studios, Peluso Microphones, and to Red Spade Records, because I like giving myself a pat on the back. Don't forget to like and subscribe and give us a review on your favorite podcast delivery method. It helps to spread this message to maybe those people that don't know anything about vinyl and you want to rope them into your favorite money suck. You can also contribute to furthering our mission at patreon.com/womeninvinyl, where you'll find all of our B-sides, deep cuts, and amazing extras, and help us to start a not-for-profit to further the demystification, education, and infiltration of more women and non-binary identifying humans into the making vinyl space. So thanks again for joining us, Jenn.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Jett, love your work.
It's a pleasure. I'm a big fan. Love you guys.
Thanks, everybody. Take it away, H.
This episode has been brought to you by Women in Vinyl, Red Spade Records, and produced by Black Circle Studios. Thank you for listening. Please remember to subscribe, and you can always contact us directly by visiting www.womeninvinyl.com.